Well, hello again, my friends, and welcome once more to the Invisible College. And if you're new to this channel, I'll just say a few words about the college. It's something I first set up in 2008 as a means of presenting what I've discovered over 50 years, or more, actually more than 50 years of research into the esotericism of the West. And that means particularly the inner teachings of Christianity and of the West. And I've done many lectures. You'll find them all on the channel here. If you want to go, you find a good listing of them in our website, which is invisiblecollege.uk. But they're on YouTube, and there's over 120, I think, free lectures. Most of them about an hour long on all sorts of different subjects. You'll find those interesting, I'm sure. But what we're dealing with today, we're investigating the forgotten history of Britain. And in particular, I've been looking into this book here, The History of the Kings of Britain by Geoffrey of Monmouth. Now, if you talk to academics about this book, they'll throw up their hands and say, oh, it's nonsense, don't bother with it. It's stupidity. He was an inventor, he was a fraud, he was a fool. All these pejorative names for this man who lived in the 12th century and who was simply translating into Latin the Welsh histories that have been preserved. He was a Welshman himself, and been preserved in Welsh. So we're looking into this, and I think you have three attitudes. You can take that first attitude, and you can take these histories and say, like Bishop Stubbs did in the 19th century, take that history and throw it in the waste paper bin. It's nonsense, get rid of it. We're going to do the real thing now. We're going to dig up the land. We're going to use archaeology. That will tell us about the past. Really, there's not much past anyway to worry about until you get to the Romans, and they wrote things down. We can study what they wrote, and that tells us all we need to know. You can take that attitude. The second attitude you can take and say, well, you know, this is gospel. We got to believe everything he says here. It's all gospel truth. This is the preserved history, and I'm not going to let anyone question it. You can be like that about it, and you can accept the dragons, you can accept the giants, you can accept the preposterous things that are said at times in this history and take it all at face value, and then you're playing like a fairy tale myth. And it's like if you were studying Greek mythology and you took the trials of Hercules. You know, he has these 12 trials he has to go through. You can say, well, that was his history, isn't it? There was a Hercules. He was this great strong man in Greece, and he had to do these things. He was set these tests and trials by the gods, by the king. Well, really, it's an allegory for life. The 12 signs of the zodiac and the tasks are related to those. Not always clearly, but they are. So when you begin to study them that way, you begin to see that there's something more going on than just recorded history. And I think that's the same thing with Geoffrey of Monmouth's history. Yes, it is historical, but it's also wrapped up with storytelling. It's wrapped up with things being confused and not fully understood. So you have to apply intelligence to it. You have to think about it, and you need to look at the whole thing much more broadly and see what is what and what might be the truth behind the history. And that's what we're going to do today, particularly with the Brutus migration. Brutus, you met him, you met his granddad, Aeneas, great-granddad actually, Aeneas, in the last lecture, and then we discussed the fall of Troy and how Aeneas was allowed to escape and how he went to Italy and he married the daughter of the king of Latium, and they founded a city there, and later their descendants founded Rome. We went into that. Now we're going to look at his great-grandson Brutus. But I won't jump ahead of myself. Let's go through the lecture step by step. So this lecture is called Brutus Goes to Britain. And in the previous lecture of this series, excuse me reading, I've got it all written on slides here and I want to give it to you correctly, so that's why I might be looking away from the camera at times. In the previous lecture of this series, we looked at the origins of the Trojan War. Compared with the global catastrophe of the First World War and the Second World War, this was a mere storm in a teacup. So why is it still remembered today? Yeah, why do we go on about the Trojan War? The answer is that it had profound consequences. It triggered major migrations from Asia Minor to Italy and even as far as Britain. Today we'll explore the later migration and its consequences for us today. So that's what this is all about. Now, here's the family tree of Troy. It's actually not fully complete here, but this is as much as we need. You can see that it has at the top Zeus and Electra. Actually, I think it shouldn't be Zeus. It's someone called Dara. We'll come to that later. And they have a son called Dardanus, and he has a son called Eratosthenes, who has a son called Tros. So this is in this mythology, let's call it that, the mythology of Troy. Tros is the founder of Troy. And he has a son called Ilus, hence Ilion or Ilium as another name for Troy. And he has a son called Laomedon. And from him are a number of people, but particularly Priam, the king of Troy at the time of the Trojan War. So we're getting down about 5 generations, is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so 7 generations if you include Electra at the top all the way down to Priam. Brings you down to the Trojan War. And you get down to his sons, Hector and Paris. They figure prominently in the Trojan War. But I won't go into that because we've done all that in the last lecture. You'll see as a side branch, which I've ringed here with a red circle, the ancestors of Aeneas, who escaped to Italy. And there's Azarachus, he has a son called Capys, and he has a son called Anchises, who has an affair with the goddess Aphrodite, and a lucky man, eh? Venus is the Latin name for Aphrodite. So they have a son who's Aeneas. So Aeneas is actually supposedly a son of Venus, the goddess, by this mortal Anchises. And they are allowed to escape from Troy and they go to Italy. Now then, we're going to follow on from there further down. So you remember that Aeneas was allowed to leave Troy. He had to carry his aged father Anchises, who had had the affair with Venus when he was young and handsome. Now he's an old man, he can't walk. He carries him on his back. And he was also accompanied by his young son, Ascanius, you see there. But his wife, Creusa, was sadly killed during the chaos that accompanied the sack of Troy. So you can see a Greek soldier putting his hand out there, is grabbing her by the shoulder, and she's not going to get away. So Anchises had a sexual encounter with the goddess Aphrodite, Venus, and she was the mother of Aeneas. This, as we shall see in future lectures, is important. Oh, you bet it is. Ascanius founded the city of Alba Longa. So Aeneas, with his second wife, Lavinia, you can see Creusa on here, but he marries again to the daughter of the king of Latium. Lavinia, and they found the city of Lavinium. But his son, Ascanius, founds a city near Rome on the lake there called Alba Longa. Ascanius has a son called Silvius, but before Brutus is born, Silvius is going to have a son called Brutus. It was prophesied that he, that's Brutus, would kill his mother and father. Well, that's a shocking thing. You go to the clairvoyant, you say, yeah, can you tell me my fortune? I'm a little bit pregnant, and I'd like to know, is it going to be a boy or a girl? Is it going to prosper? You might do that, mightn't you? But his father wants to find out. Am I going to have a son to inherit my empire, my kingdom? And they goes to the holy woman or whoever it was, and she says, well, I've got bad news for you, I'm afraid. He's going to kill his mother and father. Well, sure enough, his mother dies in childbirth, so that's killed his mother. And then later on, when he's an adolescent, he's out hunting with his father, and he accidentally fires an arrow which bounces off a tree and kills his dad. So this is considered terrible, and he's banished from Italy. So because Brutus was thought to be cursed, he was expelled from Italy. And he went to Greece, to the court of Pandrasus, the king of Epirus. Actually, I think he was the sort of high king of Greece at the time. But, they had city-states, and each state had its own, little kinglet. So you might have an overall king, high king, like Agamemnon had been at the time of the Trojan War. He was the high king. You call all the others, say, right, we're going to go to Troy, we're going to siege it, because this rascally Trojan Paris has seized my brother's wife, Helen, and his treasure. We got to go and get it back, boys. So they all went to Troy. So he was like that. He's the high king. So he goes there to Epirus. Epirus was founded, actually, by a son of Achilles. Achilles is a big figure in the Trojan War. So this guy is not to be played around with. He's come down this line of ancestry from Achilles himself. So anyway, Brutus goes there, and this is the northwest of Greece, opposite to Corfu. Beautiful island, Corfu. I haven't been there myself, but I'm told it's really beautiful. I would like to go to these Ionian islands sometime, and I probably will. Anyway, it's opposite Corfu, and it's included at that time the southern part of what is now Albania, right? So you've got Albania there opposite the heel of Italy, and a little bit further down there you've got Epirus. Now, Brutus is well received by Pandrasus, who is descended from the Greek hero Achilles. However, Brutus is appalled when he discovers that the Greeks here have Trojan slaves. You can imagine, he gets there, he's very pleased to go to Greece. He's been expelled from Italy. He's, having to find somewhere to live. And the king likes him. He admires young Brutus, who was a good warrior, good fighter, and you imagine they had sort of Olympic Games type things going on, and he proves himself. He's a man, so he likes him. But Brutus discovers that underneath the lower levels of Epirus are these Trojan slaves being kept in chains, and he's outraged. So he starts a rebellion, a slave rebellion, resulting in the death of many Greeks. And once you start a rebellion like that, you have to go all the way. You can't just do it a little bit and then say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You've got to go the whole way. So they take Pandrasus prisoner, and they don't kill him, but they take him prisoner, And he's willing. He says, "Yeah, I'll give you part of my kingdom. You know, you proved yourself. You're a good bloke. I like you. You can have part of my kingdom." But he's not going to have that. He wants the Trojans to be freed. So they take Pandrasus prisoner, threatening him with death unless he gives up his fleet and allows the marriage of Brutus to his daughter Ignoga. Ignoga? I think sometimes she's called Imogen, I think. But they call him Ignoga in Geoffrey of Monmouth. So, the king, my beautiful daughter, and you want to marry her? You want my fleet? And Brutus says yes. And the girl doesn't want to marry him. So this is actually a form of rape. He wants this daughter, who of course is descended from Achilles. And Achilles is this the best of the Greeks. He was the one who slew Hector. And he was the one who was shot in the heel by Paris, and he had been dipped in the river, you remember, by the goddess Thetis, and he should have been immortal, except that his heel wasn't covered. She'd been holding him by the heel when she dipped in the water. So he's getting a wife who's of this lineage, and that's important symbolically. So anyway, he demands he give him his fleet, and the king decides the best thing I can do, I'll let them go. So Brutus, with his new wife and the now freed Trojan slaves, takes sail. And they reach the deserted island of Leogetia, it's called in Geoffrey of Monmouth's history. And this is south from Corfu. It's actually the island the Greeks today call Leucada, the island of Leuca. So that's south from Corfu, just off the coast of Greece, but it's outside of Epirus. And here they anchor while they consider their next move. He's in a pickle now. He's got to get away. The reason they want the fleet is they want to escape from the Greeks. They know that if they stayed in Epirus and had a little part of the king's kingdom, the other Greeks would come and take revenge on them, and they would be destroyed. So they want to escape. They go to this island and they don't know where they're going to go. So they anchor there while they think about it. And the island is deserted, but he finds a ruined temple of Diana. In it is a statue of the goddess that gives answers to questions. Now, I'm using this picture here because the Diana they're really talking about is clearly Diana of Ephesus type goddess. It's not the hunting, arrow-firing Diana, sister of Apollo, ever virgin and all that. It's none of that. It's this other Diana of Ephesus, and I'll be talking a lot about her in the next episode, what this figure is really all about. Anyway, here, after pouring libations, when you're going to talk to gods in the ancient world, you very often would make offerings. A libation is you take your nice cup of wine, instead of drinking it yourself, you pour it over the altar of the gods so he can have a drink, or she can have a drink. You pour a libation. You might give them some food as well, an offering on an offering table. That's for you, God. I'm doing this for you. I'm maybe slaughtering a sheep and I'm roasting it for you. Nice smells of the roasting meat going up and to your nostrils. You do all that because you want them to help you. And you see this with Abraham, don't you? It's exactly the same thing. That's what people did in ancient times to draw the attention of their god or gods, whatever. I know we don't believe in these gods now because we're Christians, but that's what they used to do. So here, after pouring libations, he asks her which land she wants them to go to. So it's not my way. Where would you like me to go? Where would you like me to take my people? Now you'll understand why he asks her that when we go into the next lecture, all about the goddesses, different ones, how they're really the same one. which land do you want me to go to? Before sleeping in her sanctuary, he asks, Tell me, Brutus, of a safe dwelling place where I am to worship you down the ages. So it's not just, where can I go? I bought the libation. I'm going to worship you down the ages. My people are going to worship you right down the ages. They're going to build temples for you. We're going to look after you. We're going to be friends forever. So where would you like us to go? And after that, he lies down before her altar. Right? He goes to sleep. He's got a skin of a goat or something, and he lies down on that, and he has a dream. Now this is just like Jacob. Remember in the Bible, Jacob, and he had his head on the pillow stone, and he saw the ladder going up to heaven and angels going up and down it. Same kind of thing. He's going to get inspiration through a dream. So that's what he does. That night, the goddess appears to him in a dream, and she tells him, Brutus, beyond the setting sun, past the realms of Gaul, there lies an island in the sea, once occupied by giants. Now it is empty and ready for your folk. Down the years, this will prove an abode suited to you and your people, and for your descendants, it will be a second Troy. Second Troy. He's going to refound Troy. A race of kings will be born from your stock, and the round circle of the whole earth will be subject to them. So, wow, what a prophecy to be given by the goddess. She's appearing in your dream and telling you, I got a nice island for you. You're going to go to this place, and you'll be safe there, and your people will be safe. You can have a race of kings descended from you, and they're going to end up ruling the entire earth. Wow. That's all you can say, isn't it? So anyway, Brutus wakes up from his dream, and they set off. So after this, the Trojans get back into their ships. They first sail south and then westwards, following the coast of North Africa. So here you can see their journey. And they pass between Carthage, which is in Tunisia. We would call it Tunisia today, and that's where Carthage was. And Sicily. Sicily is on the other side, by the boot of Italy. Italy is kicking the football of Sicily, isn't it? They go into the western Mediterranean. That's beyond Carthage and Sicily, in the western side of the Med. And they sail along the coast of North Africa. They go to Mauritania, which goes down a bit further west from there, but Morocco was part of Mauritania in those days. And they pass through the Pillars of Hercules, which is where Gibraltar is. I think it's Ceuta on the other side, isn't it? I think it's a Spanish colony on the other side. Anyway, they go through the Pillars of Hercules, and there are sort of mermaid people, sirens, trying to tempt them and make them have a shipwreck. Well, they don't have a shipwreck. They get past that, and then they stop off on the other side. And the place they must go to is Spain. I don't think they go south into Africa. They're going northwards and the first place to stop off at was a city called Tartessus in those days, and we would call it Cadiz today. And that's the principal port of Spain. And Tartessus is what's in the Bible called Tarshish, the ships of Tarshish, because it was a Phoenician port. And you can imagine that the Phoenicians would have big ocean-going ships stationed there for their major journeys. And they actually, I've seen evidence to show that they were going across to America. They were certainly going to Mexico and almost certainly to Brazil as well. They were bringing things back, but they wouldn't let, the thing about the Phoenicians and later the Carthaginians, that they wouldn't let people from the eastern Mediterranean go into the Western Mediterranean, and they certainly wouldn't let them go beyond the Pillars of Hercules. So they were kept that private. That, this is my place. I get the stuff from out there. You can buy it from me when I bring it back, but you're not allowed to go and get it for yourself. And one of the places they used to go to was Britain, because Britain was the Tin Islands, and they used to go there to get tin. Tin was mined in Cornwall and Devon, maybe in one or two other places as well, but certainly in Cornwall and Devon. And they would buy the tin. They also mined copper in England or Britain as well, and some gold, and lead. So it was a place you went to for precious or semi-precious metals. And they could buy the tin, trade it for probably wine or other goodies from the Mediterranean area, and bring it back, and they could mix it with copper, make bronze. And bronze, if you're going to have a Bronze Age, you've got to have some bronze, haven't you? And this is where you got the tin that you needed for bronze. So anyway, Tartessus would be the likely place that he was going to stop at. So on the other side, they touch land where they meet fellow Trojans. Now, Brutus and his people, they're overjoyed. Yeah, there's some Trojans. They can speak in Trojan to them, and they understand. They're descended from the survivors of Antenor of Troy and his people. And this was likely at Tartessus, the ancient port of Cadiz. So they meet up with these other Trojans from Antenor of Troy. Antenor was a generation older than King Priam of Troy, and he was from a different branch of the royal family of Dardanus. So he's royal, but he's not the same royal as Troy itself. But he's in Troy at the time of the siege with his family. And he had advised Priam strongly that he should return Helen to Menelaus, along with stolen treasures from Sparta. I mean, he's an outsider. He can see the reality. He says, look, do you really want to have a war with the Greeks? There's no reason for this war. Just give him that Helen, she's married to Menelaus. She's been abducted by your son, Paris. And they stole some treasure as well at the same time. Give it all back, and we make peace with the Greeks, and you can trade with them, and Paris will find another wife. It's no big deal. But Priam won't hear of it. He's resolute. Well, we can defeat them. We don't need to do that. We can, we're Trojans, aren't we? We're strong. We can deal with a few Greeks. So, because Antenor had acted in this way, and he's also protected some ambassadors that the Greeks had sent along. I think Ulysses and Menelaus had come to the Trojans to ask them, in a peaceful way, give us back Helen, will you? We don't really want a war with you, but you can't have what's not yours. And Antenor had stopped the Trojans from killing the ambassadors. So they liked him. They trusted him as a good soul. So when they sacked Troy, they didn't sack his house. He put a goat skin outside, and they recognized that. And he was allowed to leave with his people. So that's another story, a bit like Aeneas. So he sailed away with his people, going westwards, and then ended up in Cadiz, Tartessus, in Spain. So very likely they knew that this is Antenor and his people, knew of the Phoenician city of Tartessus. They headed there and had settled there as Aeneas had in Latium. So just as Aeneas went to Italy, they went to Spain. Aeneas is a Trojan very much of the Hector type. He's descended from Antenor. I think he's 5th generation down. So he's probably about the same age as Brutus. And he's as strong as an ox and courageous in the extreme. And he's not a man to be trifled with. He's another great leader, another great Trojan hero. survived the ordeal of the destruction of Troy itself, and here they joined forces together. And he and his followers are a great addition to the former Trojan slaves who follow Brutus. So these guys have never been slaves. They can put a bit of spirit into the Bruti. And, well, I've already got some spirit. They wouldn't have had a successful rebellion if they didn't. But anyway, he's a great addition. So the united Trojan armies sail northwards along the coast of Spain. They make an abortive attempt to take control of Gaul, but they're outnumbered. And I'm not going to go into that because it doesn't lead anywhere. They get back into their ships and carry on northwards. The goddess wants you to go north. You've got to go to the island, not to Gaul. Eventually coming to the island the goddess had promised to them. Then called Albion, its name will be changed to Britain in honour of Brutus. All right, so they're going to the island of Albion, Ionis Wen, or Iwen Anis, in Welsh, the White Island, Albion. The Britons make their first landing at Totnes. Now, why is it called Totnes? Well, a tot is a conical hill, and there is a hill there at Totnes. There was a town called Totnes up the River Dart, but a nez in English is actually a headland. It's a sort of small peninsula sticking out into the sea. So Totnes must be referring to the peninsula. It would be the western peninsula we're talking about. That's where Totnes is further back on that. But that's where I believe where they landed actually was Dartmouth, which is the port right at the mouth of the River Dart that comes out there. It flows through Totnes, the town of Totnes, but it terminates at Dartmouth. And beyond Dartmouth, you have the entry to the River Dart. You've got high cliffs on either side there. And that's where I believe they stepped out, going onto the Nez, the Totnes. Here, Aeneas throws the giant Gog-Magog into the sea. So Aeneas loves wrestling. He's a strong guy. He's a sort of Hector, Achilles type. And sees a giant. Nobody take him on. I'm going to fight the giant single-handedly. And they have a wrestling match. And he overpowers this giant Gog-Magog and he throws him off the top of the cliff. So that's why I think it must have been near Dartmouth where you have these cliffs. If you go to Devon today, they'll tell you it was Plymouth and the Hoe at Plymouth. Well, that's quite low. It's only just above sea level. That's not where you would throw a giant into the sea with a big splash. It would have to be done at Totnes. That's where they landed. And the Nez being the peninsula, I believe it was near Dartmouth that they did this. In later legends, Gog and Magog, so they split the name up, Gog and Magog, are two giants, and figures of them are carried in the annual Lord Mayor's Parade in the City of London. You can see them there, the Lord Mayor's Parade. They have the Lord Mayor's Parade every year. A different alderman or a dignitary from the City of London, usually a senior banker or someone like that, they're elected to be the Lord Mayor of London. It's a ceremonial title. It's not the same as the London Mayor, the London Mayor who's the enemy of cars and traffic and builds cycle lanes and puts up speed signs and cameras everywhere. That's a different mayor. That's a more modern creation. This is an ancient one. This is the Mayor of London, or the City of London. And it's a very respected title, the Lord Mayor of London. They have a parade where they bring the new one in a coach and they go to the Guildhall and they have a big banquet. And my father used to go to that every year because he was a chartered accountant in the City of London. So he had an invitation to go to the Lord Mayor's banquet, so he would go. In reality, Gog of Magog is a prophesied leader of the army which will attempt to destroy Israel at the end of the age. We talked about this in other lectures, Gog and Magog. You can read all about that in chapters 38 and 39 in the book of Ezekiel. That's where the scribe, whoever was writing all this down, when he came to this bit in Geoffrey's book, or maybe it's Geoffrey himself, they know about Gog of Magog, and so they decide, well, that's what the giant must be called, Gog Magog. There's another suggestion I've read in, I forget where, but it was by a Welsh speaker, and he said probably the original name was Gower Madog. And Gower means large or big in Welsh, and Madog is a name. So it would be Big Madog. Well, that makes more sense to me. And when they call him a giant, well, maybe he was bigger than most, but I don't think we're talking about wrestling with a 16-foot giant, Even if Aeneas was pretty tough, he wouldn't be able to do that. We're talking about their strong man against the Britain's strong man, Aeneas. And I think these two statues, Gog and Magog, originally they would have represented the two wrestlers. It would be Aeneas and Madog, who would have been these figures. But it all gets changed over the centuries and mythologies and fun and games. It all changes anyway. According to another legend, Gog and Madog were brought back to London and given the task of opening and closing the huge gates of the city. So they become gatekeepers. And this is why there are, or at least was, I say past tense was, because last time I went to Fleet Street, I couldn't see this anywhere. They seemed to have moved it. But there was this little temple, and it's a clock tower. You can see the edge of the clock there facing along the street. And behind it there's this little temple with these two giant figures, or two wrestlers, and they each have a club, and they bang the bells to ring out the hours. Ding, ding. They chime every quarter hour, actually. Officially, the two wrestlers probably represented Aeneas and his opponent, who may have been called Gower Madog, as I said, meaning Big Madog in Welsh. He was likely not a giant, but just a very big man, as was Aeneas. So anyway, that's the story of Gog and Magog. Aeneas decides to stay in the west, giving his name to Cornwall, or Cornu, as it's called. Having lived in Tartessus, he probably knew all about the tin connection with Cornwall and Devon. He's not a fool. He knows that this is potentially a very rich area, not just for farmland, but you've got all the tin mines, and you've got the lead, and you've got all that stuff going on. So he says to Brutus, hey, you can carry on, go on, and you find some nice place out there on shore. But I'm going to stay here. I like this bit. And, after all, I've thrown the giant over the cliff. I've proved myself to these people. We'll stay here. So he takes on, he's going to be King of Cornwall. And Brutus sails onwards to found his capital in London. So he goes off there. Now, the original Cornwall was named after Aeneas, right? That's what I think anyway. And his people were called the Corini or Corni, i.e. the Cornish. As we shall see, they seem to have occupied the whole southwest peninsula of Britain. Not just Cornwall. Cornwall's just the tip. And then you've got, next to Cornwall, you've got the county of Devon, and then you've got Dorset and Somerset, and you've got bits of Wiltshire, and maybe even going into Hampshire, and then you go north, you go up into Gloucestershire. It's actually a much larger area than just the tip of Cornwall. As we shall see, they seem to have occupied the whole southwest peninsula, maybe more. Yeah, it could have been even bigger than that. It might have been taking in parts of Wales, or even all of it, and going up into the Midlands. I don't know. It's not clear. The capital of the region seems to have been Corinium, which we now call Cirencester. So we have a city there, an ancient city called Corinium, which obviously comes from the name of Quirinius. And it's called Corinium Dubanorum. Now, I'll explain the Dubanorum bit shortly. So, coron means crown in Welsh. Ah, yes. Just like in the Latin, it's corona, isn't it? And our English word crown is derived from that. In Welsh, it's coron. And so Quirinius is probably not a name, but rather his title. He was a king who wore a crown. Ah, so we got a king. All begins to make much more sense, doesn't it? So Corinium would have been the crown capital of the Corni or Cornish. So he's got his crown capital at Corinium. And it's very interesting that you see on this map, I'm using Roman maps in a lot of this, but they make more sense when you're dealing with the Roman period. But it does show things like you can see there's a road there that runs from Isca Dumnormiorum, which is the city we would now call Exeter. And there's a road there, it's actually the Fosse Way, which goes up from there, and it passes through Ilchester, Aquisulis, which is Bath, and it goes up to Corinium. So you've got a main road that is going straight up there, passing through Somerset and a bit of Dorset, up to Corinium. And Corinium has a lot of roads going in and out of it, just like London does. So you can see it's a major place in this early time. As I say, the Romans took it over. So Corinium was the second most important city in pre-Roman Britain. It was strategically placed on a tributary of the River Thames. Yeah, it's a tributary of the Thames that flows through it. It is also only 15.5 miles from Gloucester, which is a city the Romans founded, and the River Severn. So it's strategically placed to link the Severn and the Thames, the two major arteries of Britain. You've got the Thames flowing eastwards from Oxfordshire and with its tributary from Corinium going out into the Thames estuary and to the North Sea. And you've got the River Severn, which is the longest river in Britain, that flows up and it goes through the Midlands and up into North Wales. So these two rivers were the portals to grow into the country. And Corinium was strategically placed to use either of those for trade and for other things. Rivers were the main roads of the time before all the roads were built. And now we use the M4 or to link up somewhere like that with London to Wales, we go down the M4. But they didn't have an M4, they used the rivers. When the Romans invaded, they took it over and made it a military hub. Yeah, you can go, there's a great Roman military museum in Cirencester. You can go and look at loads of stuff in there. Many wealthy Roman Britons built villas in the vicinity. They're finding more and more these wonderful villas with the floors, mosaic floors laid out. And there's obviously a lot of wealth there. And actually, it's the gateway to the Cotswolds, which is very sought after these days. It's not Prince Charles anymore, isn't he? But he has his house there in the Cotswolds. I suppose Prince William's going to have that now. He's Duke of Cornwall, as well as being Prince of Wales. So the two go together in modern times. If you're Prince of Wales, you get the Duchy of Cornwall as well thrown in. So they had their house there. And there's lots of other wealthy people and beautiful Cotswold villages. People love that area. So Cirencester is a major point of entry to the Cotswolds. But why was Cirencester called Corinium Dubanorum by the Romans? Why? Well, Devon, the name Devon comes from Dumnonia. And the Dumnoni was the tribe of Devon, so called. But that name comes from a Duke of Cornwall who was called Dyfnwal Moelmud. He's a later one. He comes out, generations later after Brutus. But Dyfnwal, he's one of the major. He becomes a king of Britain, but he was Duke of Cornwall first. And Dyfnwal Moelmud means Donald the Bald. So, like me, he was follically challenged, presumably, and his name was Donald. And he actually framed the common law of Britain. What's called the Mulmutine Code, and it's still in our British law books today. And it says things like, if there is a stone there and nobody's using it, you can have it. It has rights of way along the King's High Roads and things like this in the Mulmutine Code. It was like our law code from the ancient times, the ancient Britons, and that's still persisted. Though Dubani or Dovani is simply another name for his tribe. So the people of Devon are we call them Dumnoni, but it's also the Dubani, the Dyfnwal Moelmud, the Dubani tribe. They're shown on this map and Roman maps of being around Cirencester, which is called Corinium Dubanorum. So it's the Corinium of the Dubani. Well, the Dubani, it's the same thing. It's all talking about these same people, the Devon people, who are actually part of the Cornish people, and going up into Somerset and in Dorset as well, and I'll talk about that in a sec. That dukedom, or part of the country. So the Romans took over Corinium as a useful military base. They moved the Coranians from there, the Dubani, to a new city called Viriconium Cornoviorum. Viriconium Cornoviorum, which is on the River Severn, and they moved them up there. And I've marked these various things to see here. You've got Corinium there at the bottom there, Cirencester. The Dubani tribe, well, actually it was, it shows that they were further north as well there. And then you've got the city of Viriconium Cornoviorum. So there's Viriconium of the Cornoviorum, the Cornovii, the new Corinians, the Cornovii, they've been moved up there into that borderland of North Wales, and Wroxeter is what we call that city today. And this is the most impressive Roman ruins of a city we have in Britain. Great big walls, and they've also found the pillars, foundations, and etc. of what must have been a very large church at one time. This was, I think, it's a third or fourth city of Britain during the Roman period. You've certainly had London, you had York. What else would you have had? You would have Colchester in Essex and Wroxeter. It was certainly perhaps the fourth city of Britain at the time, and magnificent ruins. And you can see the remains of the Roman baths and the central heating system they had for blowing hot air under the floor. You'd need that in that area up there in Shropshire. So anyway, they moved the Corni up there, and they've become the Cornovii, the new Corni. Duro is Latin for hard, and you can look that up. I checked it using Google Translate. Duro means hard, as in durable, something hard, tough, and it's not the name of a tribe. So you have Durovernum. There's various cities, and I've marked a whole load I could find here. There are others in other parts of Britain as well. So you had place names with the prefix Duro. So then you have the people who call the Duro-Triers, and they lived in Dorset, part of Cornish territory. Yeah, that's part of the whole Cornwall thing going there. And split this down, it becomes Duro-Triers. Duro, hard, Triers. And Triers, I think, means Trojans. They're the hard Trojans, tough. And the Romans had a hard time conquering that area. And you can see just outside Dorchester is Maiden Castle. And they did a big excavation there in the 1960s, or was it the 50s? And they found the remains of the various huts of the Britons who were living there. It's a massive place, one of the biggest, if not the biggest in England, massive, multiple valeted walls going round it. And this would have been the old Dorchester. And they found these huts, and they found huge Roman ballista bolts which would go right through the hut, and if you're inside it, sheltering from them, you're in real danger. And I think they found a skeleton with one of these bolts right through it. They sieged other hill forts going up the River Stour. I used to live near there. I lived in Blandford Forum for a time. And there are various hill forts like Hambledon Hill. They've excavated that and found Roman siege works up there. So they had a hard time dealing with these different hill forts. And I think it was the Roman general Vespasian who was put in charge of that part of the conquest of Britain. And it was a much tougher conquest than the eastern part of Britain. So calling them the hard Trojans, I think, is not a bad term. And actually, just outside Dorchester, you can see somewhere, see signposts to Troy Town. It's actually signposts of Troy Town. And actually, the old English name for hill forts was Troy Towns. They were called Troy Towns. It's understood they were built by the Trojans, so Troy Towns. They don't use that term now, they just call them hill forts. But they were called Troy Towns. So all of that militates together, and I think the Dorset, or the Duro-Triers, means the hard Trojans. But, the hard guys live down here. Anyway, according to Geoffrey and Tassilo, Britain was originally called Albion, which in Welsh is Iwen Ynys, which means the White Island. It's the White Island. It was renamed Britain after Brutus, its first Trojan king. After he died, it was split among his 3 sons. This is what they say in Geoffrey, and this is where I think you have to use a bit of intelligence and realise this is finding the cause after the fact. So they decide that, well, there are definitely 3 parts to Britain. There was Logres, and there was Cymru, and there was Albion. So they decide, well, he must have had 3 sons. So there's Locrinus, he gives his name to Logria, what we would now call England. And these, I should say that I've split roughly what these borders would have been, but that's not to be taken literally. I think Logria was probably smaller than I've shown it here. So you had Camber for Cambria. Well, Cambria was much larger than just Wales. It spread up into the north of England as well. Even in post-Roman times, it was very strong Welsh connection there, and into parts of Scotland too. So there was Cambria, and Albanactus, Albany. Comes from Alban, the White Island, Albion or Albany. That's the remnants, probably, of the people who had lived in Britain before this invasion of the Bruti and the Corni coming in and displacing the other people further north. And they went, retreated back into Scotland. Just as the Welsh or the ancient Britons retreated into Wales and Cornwall and parts of Scotland from the Anglo-Saxon invasions coming from the east. So that's what tends to happen. People get pushed out. Cambria is Cymru in Welsh. It appears to derive from the Greek Chimerioi or Chimerians. I'll talk about that later as well. They also come from Anatolia, actually. It's interesting how these things all seem to loop together. Logria seems to derive from the same root as the Welsh word llaig, meaning to lie flat. The root of this is a Gaulish word, liga, or lia, meaning flat, sediment, flat sediment. And this applies particularly to the Thames estuary, which is very flat and marshy. The southeast of England is the sort of flat, arable ploughland. It's the Arvus of Britain, and it's very good farmland, but it's much flatter than Wales or Scotland or even parts of the north, or even Cornwall. So it is a flat, arable place, and East Anglia in particular is completely flat. The eastern part, and that's very good for farming wheat. And you see huge fields of wheat. It's the breadbasket of Britain. The divisions of the land would seem to represent several different nations or tribes resulting from successive invasions. The people of what is now Scotland would be the remnants of the earlier inhabitants, the so-called giants, who built Stonehenge and other monuments. That's why they think of them as being giants. Who could have raised these big stones? Oh, there must have been giants, but they've gone now. The brutes of England, that's another thing like Geoffrey of Monmouth's history. The brutes of England is about the history of England. It goes right up to about the 15th century. Alan Wilson had a copy of that, and he did do me a photocopy, which I haven't got anymore. I got rid of it. You can't keep everything, unfortunately, but I can tell you a little bit about that. The brutes of England start with an earlier migration from Syria to Britain of a princess they call Albine, another white princess perhaps. And the story goes that there was a king of Syria called Dungi, and he had 50 daughters. And he wanted them to marry the sub-princes of his empire. He had an empire, it's probably Assyrian, really. And the daughters, Albine, refused, and she wasn't going to marry someone below her rank, as she saw it. And she persuaded her sisters to do likewise. And they all said, no, we're not going to marry them, they're below our rank. We're not going to marry these mere dukes, conquered earls or whatever they are with these small territories. We're princesses. We want people of our own rank. And they refused all requests by their father, and eventually he wasn't going to kill them or anything like that, but he decided that they had to go. So they were all put on a boat without oars. That's always the way, a boat without oars, sent off to sea. Let fate take them where it will. The gods will do with them as they please. Well, I'm not. Their blood's not on my hands. What happens to them is in the hands of the gods. So they go off in their boat, and eventually it drifts right through the Mediterranean. It goes to Britain, of course, and they land, and the island is empty. And of course they haven't got any men. And, they're all desirous of having sex, let's put it bluntly, of having husbands. And so the devil takes advantage of this, and the devil sleeps with them and gets them pregnant. And they give birth to this race of giants. Well, that all connects, where these Gog, Magog and giants in Britain are concerned. But actually, I think that myth has a much earlier origin to do with Syria itself. Because you have on the boundary of Syria and Lebanon and Israel, you have Mount Hermon. And that's where the gods are supposed to come down, these fallen angels, to come down from there and captivated the women, had sex with them and gave birth to a race of giants. So I think that myth of the Mount Hermon myth has been transferred via this Albine to Britain. Now, I don't think that's really correct at all, but I do think that it does represent an earlier migration from that sort of area. And you have to remember that the coast of Syria is Phoenicia. And I think we're talking about the migration of Phoenicians to Britain at some earlier period before the Trojan migration. And as I said before, the Flinders Petrie did his survey of Stonehenge, and he found evidence of Phoenician cubit being used in the construction of Stonehenge. So perhaps we have got a connection here between the Phoenicians coming to Britain and building Stonehenge. They would have been Bronze Age people. They're buying bronze. They're buying the tin they need from Cornwall to make the bronze, but also building Stonehenge and this idea of the giants. So I throw that in, but Albion means the White Island, and I'll be going into that much more in the next lecture. So Cambria is Cymru in Welsh. It appears to derive from the Greek Cymerioi or Cimmerians. They would appear to be the same people as inhabited Denmark in the Iron Age, called the Cimbri. And these would both appear to be Gaulish or Gallic. Exactly what that means, I'm not totally certain myself. But the French name for Wales is Pays de Galles. Yeah, that's what the French call Wales, which surely means land of the Gauls. You have to understand that spelling is not a barrier to these things. People did not, the vowels did not have the same fixity as they do today. People use all sorts of different vowels. They wrote things as they heard them, and they spelled things as they heard them. So Pays de Galles could be the same as the land of the Gauls. And Welsh would appear to have been spelled Welsh. Gu is pronounced like a W, as in the French name for William is Guillaume, and it's Gu, but it should be pronounced more like a W. The G is silent, so it's William. So we have these. There's many words like this in the family of Welf in Italy. That's spelt Guelphs, but actually they're the Welf. So the GU is a common usage in medieval times and before they invented starting using a W. So there would be the Welsh, or the Welsh would be the Gaulish. In Geoffrey's history, Brutus meets with Aeneas and his people in Spain. Tartessus was a Phoenician colony. The Phoenicians were trading for tin in Britain during the early Bronze Age. They knew the value of the southwest peninsula, that's the Coranians. Thus the Coranians are likely to have been, at least in part, Phoenician. Yeah, they came from, they'd landed in Tartessus in modern Cadiz in Spain. They would have intermarried with the local people. There would have been a Phoenician component to them as well as being Trojans. And they may also have been Trojans descending from the people of Antenor of Troy, as they say. By the time the Romans arrived, the situation was much more complicated, with more and more tribes named after specific regions of Britain. And sometimes these tribal names related to ancestry. At other times they're derived from topography or some historical event. So they're not all tribes. It's not like you've got these warring tribes, like it's often depicted, They're all one people, but they are different family groups and sometimes different pieces of topography. topography, as I was showing you with the Cornovii, who moved up from Cirencester up to Wroxeter, up to that area. There was migrations within the country as well. Perhaps the most important unifying event was the unification of Logres with Cornwall. According to Geoffrey, Brutus' son Locrinus was betrothed to the daughter of Aeneas. However, after Brutus died, Locrinus tried to go back on the deal and marry instead a German princess of great beauty. So you can read it in Geoffrey of Monmouth. He meets this German girl, a stunningly gorgeous German girl, who he's rescued from an evil guy who's captured her and taken her to Scotland. Not the Scots. Scots are also being invaded by this, I think he's from Scandinavia actually, this other one. Anyway, Locrinus decides he really wants this gorgeous looking German girl. But Aeneas is absolutely furious and forces him to honour the deal. He makes Locrinus marry his own daughter as promised, but Locrinus keeps the German girl hidden in London, keeps her hidden away. So he's visiting her while he's married to Aeneas' daughter. The girl eventually gives birth to a daughter called Sabrina. And Aeneas dies, and soon after that. So, he doesn't know about this going on. But Locrinus then tries to go back on his marriage. So after he died, his wife became queen over all Logres, and still angry about the German woman and her daughter Sabrina, she had the latter drowned in the great river that separates the southeast of England from Wales. So the River Severn gets its name from this dead princess who was murdered, actually, by the daughter of the Duke of Cornwall, the King of Cornwall. And of course the Severn separates the southwest peninsula from Wales. So that's kind of fitting that she would be drowned there in the middle between those two territories. This may be a fanciful tale, but it explains how the southwest and southeast of England became unified. It links the two families, Bruti and Corini, together. So the southwest peninsula becomes part of Logres. Thereafter, Cornwall became a subordinate dukedom to the Crown of Logres. Now, in the next episode, we'll investigate the esoteric side of the figure of Diana, the goddess. We looked at her earlier. It will become clear that she is the connecting link between quite a number of mysteries that link Britain with Troy, Latium, the Argetia, and the mysterious people of Albany. And Diana is not all what you might think. Her modern representation is in the figure of Britannia, the goddess of Britain. So we still have the same goddess that appeared to Brutus all those years ago when he was on the island of Liargetia or Luca, which also means white. So we shall come to that in due course, and we'll go into that whole esoteric side of this whole story to do with the goddess of Britain and what that's really all about and how Britain became the new Troy. But that will be in the next episode. So I hope you stay with me right through this. I know it's been a long lecture. We had to cover the basics before we can go into the esoterics. But believe me, we got fireworks to come with so much to discuss, and it's going to be absolutely fascinating. And if you haven't already watched the other programs in this series, may I suggest you do so. They're all on there on YouTube, on the History of Britain series. And I think this is number 6 that I'm doing today. So you'll find 5 more there. So thank you very much for your time. And if you like, you can become a Patreon to this channel through patreon.com/Adrian Gilbert. And you'll find me there. Or is it Adrian G. Gilbert? I always forget that. But anyway, you'll find me on Patreon. And I do special lectures for the members of the college, and I do newsletters for them as well. So thank you very much, and we'll meet again. Bye-bye.